What's up, my wizards? It's Dev and Ziggy from Mtg. We like it a magic, and you know why I'm here. I know why you're here. Intro. Let's get to some spoilers. Quick story, y'all. I've actually already recorded this whole part once, but I forgot to start recording in Audacity. So I didn't actually record anything. So this'll be fun to do a second time. Let's start the day off with some interesting reprints that we got to see at the lower rarities like Meteorite, Goblin Arsonist, and Riddle Form. Now, Riddle Form, cool to see again. This actually saw some play in Standard last time it was available in the Blue-Red Spells deck, but we've got so many good 2-drops for that Blue-Red Spells deck that this probably doesn't actually end up seeing any real play whatsoever because, it was barely good enough the last time it was in Standard, so I doubt it'll do anything, especially in the presence of Stormwing's presence, which we covered yesterday, and I forgot to translate the when it ETBs Scry 2, so that card is even better than I thought it was at first glance. But with cards like that, I'm pretty sure you don't have room for Riddle Form anymore, but in Blue-Red Spells Unlimited, this looks pretty decent. Goblin Arsonist, hey, we get more standard goblins, y'all. And as a matter of fact, we got a goblin payoff today that we'll talk about way later in the video, but that card's not meant for standard as far as I can tell. But Goblin Arsonist is at least a sweet little 1-drop goblin. If you want to play goblins in standard, you've got a bunch of them in the 1-drop slot now, so there's that. But in terms of Meteorite, there's actually a cute little combo we can do in Standard with Meteorite right now involving Escape Protocol, where every time you cycle a card, you just blink your Meteorite, and eventually you kill your opponent with a meteor shower, effectively. So that might be a really fun, budget kind of deck to do on Dank Jank or something. But I really don't think that deck does anything in Standard because Meteorite costs way too much to get out in the first place. And 2 damage is pretty bad. Speaking of limited playable reprints at the lower rarities, we also saw Furious Rise. Really fast reprint on this. This is actually my exclusive preview a couple of sets ago, and it's done nothing in Standard since then. And it will continue to do nothing in Standard now that it's reprinted, but it's always been a neat little limited piece of pseudo card advantage, and it will probably continue to do that as well. So good to have Furious Rise back for limited. Now, as far as even lower rarity stuff than that's not reprinted, we also saw Rambunctious Mutt, Valorous Steed, and we might as well talk about Light of Promise while we're on white cards here. Light of Promise is very likely a trap. I'm not sure how much life gain support there actually is for limited in this set, so there's that. And I don't like auras in general in most environments, but in Standard it's even more of a trap because 3 mana is ridiculously expensive. And even the Heliod decks that you'd think would want this don't. There's already way too many good 3-drops to play in that deck to cut any of them for an aura that might get you blown out when you try to play it on one of your creatures. And it just effectively ends the game right then and there. Don't play this card, it's a trap. But anyway, moving on to Rambunctious Mutt. This is easily my favorite of these 3 cards. It's just, in terms of overall design, art, flavor text, all of that, I really love this card. But the function is okay too. For 5 mana, you get a 3/4 dog, and when it ETBs, destroy target artifact or an enchantment on opponent controls. It feels acidic slime-ish to me, but really it's more like a Reclamation Sage or a similar creature like that, a Knight of Autumn, that just costs way too much mana. So I'm not sure this is actually going to see play anywhere, but it might be a decent limited sideboard option. Or hey, if you're building standard dogs, feel free to put this in your board. I'm not going to look at you funny. But up next is Valorous Steed, 5 mana for a 3/3 unicorn with Vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, you get a 2/2 white knight creature token with Vigilance. So I like the flavor here. A knight that's riding a unicorn. Pretty awesome. And honestly, 5 mana for 5/5 worth of Vigilance stats on 2 bodies, not bad either, but probably just a bread and butter, sort of 1.5 common. If I had to rate the card right now, it's probably along the lines of a 1.5, a 23rd card that you put in your deck when you don't have any better creatures to put in. I'm not sure how great this thing actually is. And by the way, if you haven't caught on yet, I'm not sure how great this actually is. It's just Deb for it. This is a bad card. But anyway, let's move on to some red stuff like Hellkite Punisher, Heartfire Immolator, and I believe this is called Treacherous Act? Treacherous Greed, that's what it's called. But we'll actually talk about that one last, because I think it's the best of these cards for Standard play. But Hellkite Punisher is just kind of doing a more expensive Shivan Dragon impression, kind of. Costs 1 more than Shivan, but hey, it's got PT, so it's got 1 more PT, so I guess that's good. But anyway, it's not good. It's not very good. But I guess if you want a big dumb flying dragon to finish limited games for you in your ramp decks, to take this, but other than that, it's not very good. Heartfire Immolator, however, is pretty good. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 2/2 human wizard with prowess, so it's already pretty decent. You can pay a red and sack it to have it deal damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker. In terms of limited, Signpost uncommon right here. The blue-red spells deck needs every copy of this that it can get. Takes out big creatures. I mean, honestly, even in not blue-red spells, this is probably a card that you play. You know, if you're playing Sealed or something, this is a bear, a 2 mana 2/2. It's a body that also functions as removal, and that is pretty much going to be a good card in every game of Magic that you play in Limited. There it is, ladies and gentlemen, your groundbreaking assessment. Removal on a body is good in Limited. Not necessarily like a revelation or anything, but it's definitely a true statement. But let's move on to Treacherous Greed here, which is just an active treason that costs 1 more than active treason, but it adds 2 mana of any one color to your mana pool. And that's good. That's pretty good. I actually think this could see sideboard play in Standard, because the red-black sacrifice decks normally do play active treason in their board, and usually you're not playing active treason on curve anyway. So decks that want to, like red-black sack that wants to side in active treason is probably more than happy paying the extra mana for this, so long as it pays them back. So I think this probably does see sideboard play in Standard, but in Limited, it's just a solid playable card. They print an active treason effect in just about every set, and they're always at least somewhat playable in Limited, so keep that in mind. It's not bad. But let's take a small step up in quality finally here, so we can look at Vengeful Leafkin. This is 4 mana, 2 a red and a green for a 4/3 elemental druid. And Leafkin's getting beefy. I didn't know you came that big. I thought you were all 0/3s. But you can tap it to add a green for each creature you control of power 4 or greater, so it always taps for at least 1 green. But you can pay 7 and a red to have Leafkin deal damage equal to its power to target player or planeswalker. And that's not as bad as it looks. Right, in Limited, we're definitely seeing a theme in Gruul colors, again, of, basically ferocious, power 4 or greater creatures. And I'm always kind of a fan of that theme, but it's almost never executed well in Limited. Like, it's almost never the best Limited deck, so keep that in mind. But I actually think this could see play outside of Limited. In some cases, because there are multiple ways in Standard, believe it or not, to generate infinite mana. And if you can generate infinite mana, suddenly this is a win condition. You just pump all that infinite mana into it and deal all the damage you want to your opponent. And that is pretty interesting. I don't think this propels those decks to the forefront, because all the infinite mana combos are like 4 and 5 card combos, and that's a little bit tough. But at the same time, if you can go infinite, this is the piece you were looking for to actually win the game. Let's look at Garruk Uprising. Your boy is back in town. 3 mana, 2 and a green for an enchantment. When this enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creature you control have trample. Wow. And when a creature with power 4 or greater ETBs under your control, draw a card. So this is interesting. Good green card draw piece for Limited. Let me put that out there right away, because we've already seen a bunch of green cards that want to draw cards. So this will help you do that a little bit, and I like that. So this is probably bound to see some Commander play, especially in decks that just play big dudes. It's a really, really good card draw engine, so I'd like to see it there, but I don't think we'll get a chance to see it in Standard. And Thunder rolled right as I said that, so I might be wrong. Let's move on to Transmogrify here. 4 mana, 3 and a red for a sorcery, exile target creature. That creature's controller reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card. That player puts that card onto the battlefield, shuffles the rest into their library. Sounds familiar? That's because it's basically polymorph. And it's also kind of Luca's -2 ability, which we already know was decent in this format when we had Agent of Treachery. Not anywhere near as good now. And I will say, you're taking a mana off of Luca's cost, but I'm not sure that's actually worth, losing a Planeswalker that does other stuff and does this ability twice. So, but 1 mana can make all the difference in the world in a game of turns, and that's what Magic the Gathering is. So being able to cast this on, say, turn 3 off of some ramp might actually be pretty sweet. But the best use for this is just like the Luca decks. Play a bunch of token-producing cards that aren't actually creatures, right? Just planeswalkers that do it. We've got like 3 or 4 of those right now that produce tokens. Plus, Raise the Alarm and Omen of the Sun. There's just a million different cards that aren't creatures that produce tokens. So make a token, exile it, and then go get the 1 creature you have in the deck. So yeah, do that. Have fun with that. I think that could be pretty cool. But all I'm saying is I'm not really sure this is of much use now that Agent of Treachery is banned. And Luca was probably the better, more consistent way of doing it in the first place. But just keep an eye on all the creatures they print while this is in the format. Because it could be very, very relevant if they print a creature that's worth transmogrifying into from your tokens. Let's look at probably the craziest red card of the day. Not the best red card of the day, but the craziest. And that's Fiery Emancipation right here. 6 mana, 3 and 3 red for an enchantment. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage to that permanent or player instead. So what I actually think this is an attempt to make Commander Burn viable. I think that's actually what we're seeing, because I don't really know what else this is supposed to do in any other format, to be honest. I guess in Standard, or for that matter, Pioneer, Historic, you can Ironcrag Feat this into play, unlike turn 4. Or maybe even turn 3 if you have some ramp. That's a possibility. And then you can go off on the next turn, and that would be good, right? There's also the fact that in Standard we have Torbrand and Obosh, so that's a curve. Turn 4 Torbrand. Turn 5 Obosh, turn 6 this. And then a shock does like 24. I think that math is correct. Torbrand is probably just better than this. Obosh is probably just better than this. If you're playing either of those cards, you probably just don't play this card, because 6 mana is a pretty big ask, and by the time you do get this down, any self-respecting burn deck either should have won the game by then, or if they spend all 6 of their mana to drop this, they'll probably just die on their opponent's turn. Right? You might die before you actually get the chance to untap with this in play. And if you do untap with this in play, you still have to have burn spells in your hand. There's just so many things that have to go correct for you to win with this. But hey, I'm not going to really scoff that much at a Furnace of Wrath that doesn't count your opponent's stuff and triples rather than doubles. Really cool callback to Furnace, but I want this to be a good, janky, fun card to play in Standard, and that's probably what it is. That's what we'll do with it, but I don't really think it goes much farther than Jank Lord status. But now it's time to talk about some of the best cards of the day. But to do that, I have to go all the way back down to the common rarity and start with Frantic Inventory. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an instant, draw a card. Then draw cards equal to the number of cards named Frantic Inventory in your graveyard. Does that sound familiar? It should, if you play with Accumulated Knowledge. I loved Accumulated Knowledge so much. It's one of the only good cards in Nemesis, it feels like. But I loved Accumulated Knowledge so much, way back in my old Control player days. I like to say I'm a reformed Control player. But I loved AK so much, so I'm super glad to have a card like it back. I mean, it's effectively the exact same card. But I do have some reservations about it. I think Omen of the Sea is probably just a better card in most Standard, Control lists. Not only because it lets you dig a little bit before you draw, but also because you can blink it with a Yorion. You can't blink Frantic Inventory with a Yorion. Plus, there's so many ways to, mess around with people's graveyards in this format that it's no guarantee that you'll be able to draw the 3 or 4 cards off the 3rd or 4th copy of this. Because there's so many ways of messing around with your graveyard. So I'm just not sure this is anywhere near as good as it used to be. Because, again, Omen is in the format, and there's just so much graveyard hate. So I don't know that Frantic is the card it used to be, but I really, really hope that it is. Also, just gentle reminder that in the limited environment, you can play as many copies of a card as you get. So if you draft 6 copies of this, you can play all of them. I just want to throw, there's no 4 of limit in limited. Just keep that in mind. But anyway, let's move on to Lofty Denial, which is another blue common, and this one is just undeniably great. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an instant. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. If you control a creature with flying, counter target spell unless its controller pays 4 instead. So it reminds me of Lookout's Dispersal right off the rip, but it's just way better than Lookout's Dispersal. It's much easier to control a creature with flying. So just keep that in mind. I think this is an amazing card right off the bat because of that. But this could see play beyond Standard. This could see play in Modern Spirits, for instance. But I'm usually the Standard guy, so I'll stick to that. In Standard, we have Spectral Sailor, which is probably the best card to go with this. Play it on turn 1, end of your opponent's turn. You set this up for turn 2. But there's other ways to do it, First of all, let me point out, with Spectral Sailor, it might also be a fun play to have 3 mana available. And when they go to cast a spell, Spectral Sailor, into Lofty Denial. They'll never see it coming. But anyway, we also have Fairy Miscreant, Scary Terry, old Terramander. He's been waiting for a chance to get back in the game, coach. Maybe this is his chance. But there's also Healer's Hawk and Fairy Guide Mother and all that. There's just a bunch of 1-mana flyers that turn this on very, very early in the game. But I will say, let me point this out too. In a lot of situations, you don't really have to have a flyer on turn 1 and turn this on that early in the game. You know, if they go to play a Teferi on turn 3, they're using all their mana, so a Daze is just as good as a Convolute in that situation. So, you know, in most cases, this is going to be a decent counterspell. You know, it's no Quench, but it's going to be a decent counterspell all the way up to like turn 3 or 4 in some games, because opponents use most of their mana on most turns of the game, so Lofty Denial is going to counter something, regardless of whether or not you have a creature with flying. But again, it is not hard to get a flying dude out on turn 1 and turn this into the best counterspell in Standard on turn 2. But speaking of good cards, let's talk about the actual best card of the entire day. Not even close. This is Conspicuous Snoop. Snoop Dogg is 2 mana, both of it's red, for a 2/2 Goblin Rogue. You play with the top card of your library reveal. You may cast Goblin spells from the top of your library. Now, if the card stopped there, it'd be good. It really would, but there's another line of text that completely breaks the card. As long as the top card of your library is a Goblin card, Conspicuous Snoop has all activated abilities of that card. So what you do, if you haven't heard this yet, is you Kiki Jiki. What you can do is you can Boggart Harbinger the Kiki Jiki to the top of your library, and then effectively just make infinite copies of Conspicuous Snoop. And then you can turn all of your Snoop into, say, Mog Fanatics or Sling Gang Commanders or whatever, and just win the game that way. You know, just sack them all for infinite damage. So right there in pretty much every non-standard format, well, not Pioneer or Historic either, but in older formats, you've got yourself an infinite combo in your Goblins deck that just wins the game on the spot. So that's really cool. Might bring Goblins back to the forefront of playability again, but I want to play it in Standard. Like even without infinite combos, I think this is pretty interesting. Snoop again is easily one of the best cards, easily the best card of the day, and maybe potentially one of the best cards in the entire set so far. Alright, but last card of the day, everybody. We got Garruk Unchained right here. Big boy, 4 mana, 2/2 green for 4 loyalty Garruk. You can +1 it to have up to 1 target creature gain +3/+3 and trample till EOT. You can -2 Garruk to have a 3/3 beast creature token get created. And then if an opponent controls more creatures than you put a loyalty counter on Garruk. And you can -7 this dude to have an emblem with, at the beginning of your end step, you may search your library for a creature card and put it onto the battlefield. Then shuffle your library. I actually kind of like this Garruk Planeswalker. So far, the reaction from the community in the short time since the card's been previewed has been a resounding meh, for the most part, but I kind of like that about most of the Planeswalkers we've seen in this set so far. Like, they're decent, but they're not crazy. Like, they're not broken or busted or anything. We're not seeing anything on 3 fairy levels in this set. Planeswalkers are just kind of good. Not bad magic cards, not amazing magic cards, just kind of good. And this Garruk also kind of follows that formula, but there's some interesting things about it that I really like. Like, first of all, it can create at least, as long as it doesn't get attacked into, it can create at least 2 3/3s. So 4 mana for a couple of 3/3s isn't the worst deal in the world. And it's kind of making a 6/6 trample on turn 4, or even turn 3 if you drop this with a little bit of ramp, because you'll make the 3/3, and next turn you can tick up Garruk to make that same 3/3 a 6/6 with trample. So it's not actually a terrible curve if you're talking about speed, but the fact that this can protect itself the turn it comes down, and it comes down relatively early, is something that I really do like about it. A lot of people have been saying that the 4 mana Vivian, the one that rotates in the fall, is just a better 4 mana Planeswalker than this. And in some cases it definitely is. I'm a big fan of 4 mana Vivian. I've said that a bunch of times in the past, but 4 mana Vivian can't really protect itself in any meaningful way the turn that it comes down, and this can, really easily. So it's also a little bit easier to cast than 4 mana Vivian. I like a lot about this Garruk, and I think that we're all just kind of spoiled on like really, really good Planeswalkers that do broken stuff. So when we see a Planeswalker like this, we're like, oh, that's actively bad. It's not. It's actually a pretty decent card. Is it good enough to see Standard play? I don't know. I really don't know about that one. Maybe post-rotation when things probably get at least a little bit more fair, but I say that, but we're still going to have, like, Throne of Eldraine and Ikoria and Standard, so, like, how fair can things actually be? But I would imagine things get a little bit more fair, hopefully, after rotation, and then maybe cards like this get a chance to shine, but until then, I'm not too sure about it, but I do want to go on record as saying I think this is a little bit better than a lot of people are evaluating it at this point. But that's all the spoilers for today. Not a whole lot of really crazy stuff, but a lot of really interesting stuff that has, like, you know, different dimensions to it, and different decks you can play it in. I mean, we did see a fair amount of, like, limited playable garbage, but there were some fun reprints today. So let me know what you liked down there in the comments section, where I was way off in my evaluation, or any crazy interactions I missed that are completely game-breaking, because it happens from time to time. So let me know all that down there in the comments section. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it yet, hit the bell for the notifications, call to action to the YouTube thing, set up the Patreon, just $1 a month to choose what decks we even do once we actually roll around to Core 2021 season, which won't be too long now, so get in there, hit the link for that, or go over to TCG Player and pre-order any of the shiny stuff that you want. When you do that through the link in the description, helps you dude out. So yeah, get to it. You don't have to do any of that stuff. I'm just glad that you're here, but if you do any of it, I thank you a lot. But anyway, I guess I'm done, so it's your turn. Just tell me how you felt about the stuff, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.